Hey there, it's PK Beats, and welcome to the last DLC focused random Smash Facts video. As Sora, the final character, has been released and available for over a week now. Since he's so new, and because this is just kind of what this channel is known for, I'm going to cover a bunch of random information and questions regarding him and his moveset, as well as his new stage, and his Battle Victory Slowdown Animation thingy. Since these seem to be the three main themes of testing, I'm going to sort of split the video into those three parts, starting with Sora as a character. But before that, I'd like to thank today's video sponsor, Ace Defender. Ace Defender is a high-quality mobile SRPG game, combining authentic turn-based RPG battle with tower defense elements. The game has a traditional RPG storyline solo player with 40 plus chapters, making nearly 2,000 levels. The storyline involves a rebellion in the Dragon Clan which threatens the balance of good and evil in the world. Our heroine, Alipida, the Silver Dragon Princess, escaped with the Creation Crystal to the human lands. There she awoke the Creation Crystal and summoned heroes to fight evil, with your help. There's 5 hero factions available: Divine, Demon, Shadow, Nature, and Light, with deep hero background stories. You start with 48 heroes, and there's 2 new heroes released every 2 weeks. You can then level them up, combine your heroes, and equip gear to create a powerful lineup. You can use the 1x, 2x, or even up to 4x gameplay modes to speed up or slow down the action, and use this to enjoy the Expedition mode, which is a solo mode, or PvE, where you explore dungeons and regions, engage in trials, level up your heroes, and collect rare items. And there's PvP, where you fight against other players within your server or across servers with multiple lineups. New users who download the game from the link in the description will get 10 Royal Recruit tickets after completing level 2-8. You can use the tickets by clicking on Sky City, going to Tavern, and going to Recruit 10x. So if you want to try out this free-to-play SRPG game with tons of lore and game modes to enjoy, click the link in the description. And thank you Ace Defender for sponsoring today's video. Anyhow, first up, let's go over Sora's counter, shall we? He's got a bit of a unique one in that, rather than just doing a basic counter move, he first stuns the opponent, which brings up several questions. First is regarding the stun. If we slow down Sora, we can see that a stunned character only gets stunned for a short while, so there's nothing crazy going on there. Though in doing this testing, I found that if I hit the first hit of Marth's up smash, Sora's counter went off almost immediately, with no stun. The only other time I found this to happen was when the counter went off on a projectile of any sort. I tried similar multi-hits like Shulk's up smash or just, Nessa's forward air, weak multi-hits, and nothing strange happened. So it's kinda weird that Marth's up smash triggered the fast counter despite not being a projectile. Oh, and speaking of projectiles, as Sakurai went over, the move is a reflector too, but it doesn't actually change the trajectory of a projectile. But with the boomerang, we can see that it does indeed make the projectile owned by Sora now, which we can even test with portals. So nothing too crazy here either. What's crazy is regarding the stun mechanic. Why is it crazy? Well, because it seems to work for, anything. Wonder Wing is supposed to be invincible to everything but grabs, yet it gets countered just fine. And a big one that I noticed was Kuklang. If you counter the falling hit, hero gets forced out of Kuklang. Yes, the Kuklang, the move that makes hero, pretty dang invincible. But this isn't surefire. If you counter an outside source, and the counter hits a Kuklang person, it doesn't remove Kuklang in that instance. And if Sora counters something that the person in Kuklang did, like this thrown Fire Flower, but it doesn't counter Kuklang itself, then again the counter won't do anything. The counter only cancels Kuklang if it's countering Kuklang itself, which is still pretty bonkers. Oh, and if you get countered while you're invincible, you'll still be stunned, but of course the counter won't hit. But being stunned despite being invincible is still something, but it doesn't really mean too much. And out of curiosity, I tested some assists to see what would happen with Sora's counter, and the counter does the same thing it does for projectiles or the first hit of Marth's up smash, in that it just activates instantly, no stun, which I guess kinda makes sense. Next, let's talk about neutral special. First, Gregory Lynn asks how scaling works with this move. Let's start with the control. Feurolant starts out with 7% up close, Thundaga does a total of 19.6% for all hits, and blizwald does 10.5% total up close. But the thing is, even if you use all 3 moves in a row without resetting, the damage is the same as before, when they were technically fresh. This means that one spell does not end up scaling the other spells. We can see this another way. If we use Feurolant 3 times in a row by cycling through and missing the other spells, we see its damage goes down to 6.1% and to 5.5%. And yet if we then use Thundaga, it does 19.6% as it did before. So yeah, each spell scales individually, rather than neutral B as a whole scaling with use. Also, Feurolant stales per use without cycling, meaning each individual fireball will be weaker than before. And this isn't due to the increasing range between Sora and Hero here, as if we stale it a ton, then cycle through and try it again at point blank range, the move now does about 3%, which is less than half the original point blank damage, so keep that in mind. Also regarding neutral special, we have to talk about Kirby, of course. When he inhales Sora, he'll have access to the same spread of spells, but you can also see that he doesn't actually pull out a Keyblade, but rather just has some sort of color-coded replacement for it. I guess this means he isn't a Keyblade wielder, or whatever the lore of that is. Regarding which spell he starts with, even if he swallows Sora when Sora's at Thundaga, Kirby will start with Feurolant all the same, so nothing crazy. Also, I was curious about Sora's taunt spells, the ones that don't actually do anything. These also cycle through 3 spells. I was curious if, just like how the upcoming neutral special gets preserved between stocks, if the taunt spell also gets preserved. So I did the first 2 and got KO'd, and unfortunately the taunt spells went right back to the first one. It kinda makes sense why, but I guess I was kind of expecting this to be conserved too, but oh well. And throwing this here, but going into sudden death, Sora will always start with Feurolant, no matter which spell he was at before. Okay, here's something I've been told about a ton of times, but if Sora picks up a sword item, he'll enter the Valor form, a new stance where he holds the Keyblade over his shoulder, and his rate of bobbing gets faster. Well, this doesn't happen just when you pick up sword items, as it happens when you have any item in your hand, except for heavy items, which puts Sora in the struggling form. I had to ask Twitter for the significance of this Valor form, and apparently this is the form in Kingdom Hearts 2 that Sora goes into when he dual wields Keyblades, which happens after he, sacrifices Goofy? Okay, as a complete outsider to the Kingdom Hearts games, hearing anything about this game's lore is just surreal. I feel like I've heard about Goofy dying like 100 times. But basically, this is a reference to the games where Sora dual wields Keyblades, I guess, which is pretty cool actually. Speaking of Sora's Keyblade though, for the last topic of this section, Rashi Rosalind asks if the Keyblade is a sword, through technicality. It's got blade in the name, but I've also seen Kingdom Hearts fans on Twitter bring up that it's not a sword, which was done in defense when people were saying Sora is just a sword fighter, yada yada. And I also started wondering myself considering how it doesn't sound like a sword at all. Mostly just like a blunt object, you know? So anyways, the test is pretty simple. I have one spirit with sword attack up, and I have another spirit with no buff of any sort, and their attack powers are very similar, with the one higher up being the one with no buff. This difference in natural power isn't big enough to really show up, but even if it was, it implied that the control spirit here would be stronger than the sword attack up spirit, which would still show us what we need to know. For the control spirit test, F smash does 24%, down tilt does 8.1%, up tilt does 15.2%, and the forward air combo does 20.6%. Now for the spirit with the sword attack up buff, F smash does 26%, down tilt does 8.8%, up tilt does 16.4%, and forward air does 22.4%. Higher numbers all across the board. This confirms that the sword attack buff is taking place here, meaning that Sora's Keyblade is definitely a sword. Alright, moving on, let's touch on that hollow Bastion stage. The main point of interest in this stage is the dive to the heart thing, where when the match is almost over, it transitions to this new background. This happens either when someone ends up on their last stock, or when about a minute is left on the match, or rather closer to about 45 seconds left. There is a bit of variance here, especially in stock matches. If you go to one stock too quickly, the transition takes a little longer to appear. I reckon because the background has to have gone through enough of its motions before it can switch or something. This transition, funny enough, only happens when hazards are on. With hazards on, this can happen not only on the normal stage, but also on the Omega and Battlefield variants too, which is very nice. However, with hazards off, the dive to the hearts transition stops happening, both on the normal stage and on the Omega and Battlefield variants. This makes this the only instance where hazards on or off makes a difference on the stage's Omega and Battlefield forms, I'm pretty sure. This is kind of a weird decision to me, but luckily due to the shadow change where the Shy Guys on Yoshi's story no longer carry food items when items are off, the potential of a hazards on stage list is being discussed again now in the competitive Smash community. I have no idea what's going to happen with that, but it's at least something. And yes, the stage when going into sudden death will stay in the dive to the heart transition, and keep the same style as it was beforehand. So now some neat tests. In a 1 minute match, the dive to the heart doesn't appear at 45 seconds, but rather at about 30 seconds left. Likely for the same reason that getting to one stock super quickly didn't instantly change the stage before. As you can see, the delayed transition happens at about the same part of the stage's background. Keep this part of the background in mind as it's going to come up a lot later. And in the one stock match, the same thing happens, where it just changes the stage specifically at this portion of the background, which happens about 30 seconds in. Now here's the thing I was most curious about when I saw this stage, but what happens if you use an S flag after the dive to the heart transition happens? If you go above one stock after the stage is already transitioned, nothing happens. The stage stays the way it is. This was partially expected, but then I thought of something else. What if I go into a one stock match where the transition is sort of scheduled to happen after about 30 seconds, and before that happens you go back up to 2 stocks each? When I do this, the stage still transitions. So it's like there's a certain set of flags that can get set off that make the dive to the heart transition happen. And once the flag is triggered, it can't really be undone. So that's pretty interesting. But on that note, lastly for this topic, Big Cheese asks what happens with this dive to the heart transition with stage morphs. I have 2 tests for this, knowing what we know now. First, the basic test. If we go down to 1 stock while on the first stage, when we morph to Hollow Bastion, it'll start at the very beginning, which as you could expect, would mean that once about 30 seconds pass, we get to this part of the background and the stage changes to dive to the heart. What's interesting though is that if you go back to Battlefield and then increase your stock count with S flags, when you go back to Hollow Bastion, you just won't go to dive to the heart again. Meaning under these circumstances, the game forgets that you were at 1 stock once, and thus you can skip it this time. It's very interesting. That's it for the stage for now though, methinks. The final topic for today is this mechanic, this slowdown thingy. It only happens if you get it in stamina mode, and obviously only if it's the last stock, and it doesn't happen if Sora's not the one to get the finishing blow. It doesn't happen in normal modes because you can only get KOs there if the opponent reaches the blast zone. Even in stamina mode, if you get the final KO by tossing them into the blast zone, rather than getting their HP to 0, no special animation happens. And actually, I totally forgot about this originally, but if you then test this with an instant KO move like the Death Scythe, which doesn't need to hit them into the blast zone, it still doesn't do anything special. So you can kinda disregard my logic I said earlier, because this doesn't happen unless you get the opponent's HP to 0 on their last stock as Sora in stamina mode. So keep all this in mind. First, the Baron of Bacon gives me a fact regarding character sizes and the special KO animation. That is, the pitch of this slowdown animation is actually tied to Sora's size for some reason. I use Special Smash with size changes and also stacked with an additional size change item for 5 tests. So let's see them here. Still don't know why that's how it works, but it's pretty funny. Next, 4Strings asks what happens regarding this animation in the case of a tie. In a match where it's Sora versus another character and the result of a tie, the ending animation is just normal. This is regardless of whether or not he even has a hand to play in that tie. However, if the match is between 2 Soras, if they tie, then the special animation will happen. I think it's actually pretty interesting, but if all parties involved in that tie KO are Soras, then the animation happens. That's pretty cool. Next, No gives me a little fact about Sora's final smash in stamina mode. This is going to be pretty brief, but if you finish off someone's final stock in stamina mode with Sora's final smash, the animation gets a little bit odd. It's like Sora undergoes some sort of grab release or something. It's kind of hard to tell because of all that light, but it just looks kind of weird, I don't know. And lastly for today's video, Oliver Grant gives me a fact regarding Sora in stamina mode and Squad Strike. That is, if you do the tag team version of Squad Strike on stamina mode, when you get to the second to last character in the opposing lineup, after you KO them you might notice that things briefly slow down for some reason, before going back to normal for the final opponent to spawn. That slowdown doesn't happen for any of the other KOs, and it's awfully similar to Sora's unique slowdown animation, isn't it? This happens in both 3v3 and 5v5. As long as you're KOing the second to last opponent. I don't really get what's happening here. It's like the game is very briefly confused and thinks that you've dealt the final blow of the stamina match when there's really just one character left. And the fact that this doesn't happen for all of the Squad Strike KOs and just the second to last one is weird. Also in this setting, the dive to the heart transition seems to happen after you've KO'd the second to last fighter as well, which incidentally is the same time as this weird slowdown, which can make it seem even more similar to the real slowdown effect. It's just really weird. But I think that'll be it for today's overall coverage of Sora. I'd like to thank my splendiferous patrons, Skully, Burbo, Hope King, Niklz, Raighne, Sylvi700, BG, Dameplay, Feurolant, Nestor Franco, blizwald, DanishToast, Gabrielle, Gaby, Jigs, North2043, RustyRantsYT, sadasda, Stan, LOONA, wingedcatgirl, and Yatta Ze. So yeah, that'll be the last time I do a dedicated video around one specific character, probably. The fact that we've gotten as much DLC as we have is really insane as it is, but it's also been really easy to get used to because it's been happening for about 3 years now. And I doubt this is going to be the last patch, as they're probably going to release more patches to fix anything game breaking and just sort of polish up the game, but I don't think that's going to last long, so in terms of developer support, the game's just about done now. Of course, I don't think that means anything regarding the game's lifespan. It's still got a good amount of legs on it going forward, I think. So we'll just keep up the grind and talk about all the mini facts and details and glitches and other wacky stuff regarding the game, and keep things interesting. You know, I'd actually had ideas for a sort of a what to expect from the future of Smash video, where I talk about what could happen to the series going forward, and what I expect, but I've been seeing people on Twitter sort of bully that mindset, sort of like, oh, it's way too soon to be talking about that sort of thing, and let Sakurai have a break, guys, jeez. Which I actually don't disagree with at all, but you know, I think it's an interesting topic to at least talk about, especially if you anticipate that nothing would happen for like a decade. So if you guys want to see that video, leave a comment and all that, and I might consider it down the line. I think that could be an interesting commentary video, but I also don't want to become easy Twitter like bait and get bashed to boost someone else's depleting ego. So, you know. Anyhow, thanks for watching the video and supporting me, stay casual, and I'll see y'all later.